Hey everybody, this is Ms. Moriarty and I'm here to discuss with us our topic 8.5 as well as 8.6. Remember, as you watch the video, you want to make sure that you are taking down notes. So here we go. 8.5 is all about eutrophication. I know we've discussed eutrophication many times this year, but it is another very important topic in AP Environmental Science, especially in Unit 8. We know that eutrophication is oftentimes caused by two types of nutrients, and that is nitrogen as well as phosphorus. And remember, it is both nitrogen and phosphorus that are actually limiting nutrients for plant life. So when there is an excess of these then nutrients, especially in aquatic environments, that's going to fuel the algae growth that we see in the image there. Now, that algae bloom is going to cover the surface of the water, blocking any sunlight that should penetrate, as well as killing any of the plants below the surface. Now, anything that lives eventually will have to die. And it is the bacteria found in that then aquatic ecosystem that helps to break down and decompose that dead algae. And because that bacteria are heterotrophic organisms, they're going to require cellular respiration. And in cellular respiration, that's going to require oxygen that is dissolved in the water. And so that bacteria is then going to be taking up a lot of the available DO. That's going to lower its levels. It's going to increase then the BOD, or biological oxygen demand, and it's going to cause then death of a lot of aquatic animals, especially fish in that ecosystem. And actually, if you look back, it causes a positive feedback loop. I know we've touched upon positive feedback, negative feedback loops a little bit this year, but remember, a positive feedback loop doesn't necessarily mean positive outcome. It just means that whatever phenomenon is occurring, process, reaction, is being pushed further and further towards the extreme. So in this case, you'll find that the less oxygen there is, the more dead organisms we will find. The more dead organisms, that's the greater bacterial decomposition, means less and less oxygen. So as you can see, it's pushing it more and more towards the extreme. Now, we can see different types of eutrophication, and typically eutrophication driven by human influence is known as cultural eutrophication. This is where we can see anthropogenic nutrients, typically coming from either sewage treatment plants due to human waste, soaps, or detergents that have phosphates found in them. We can see animal waste from CAFOs, or even synthetic fertilizers being used on agricultural fields nearby. That would be known as cultural eutrophication in this case. Now, what would be the difference then between a lake that is considered to be eutrophic versus oligotrophic? Now, waterways with very low nutrient content, low nitrogen, low phosphate levels, a stable algae population, and a very high dissolved oxygen amount is typically where we would see an oligotrophic lake. That's nice and clear, deep. That's usually the type of lake that's going to be favored for recreational things such as swimming, fishing, and boating. Usually that's due to a lack of nutrient pollution, or maybe even the age of the body of water. We can also see that aquatic ecosystems can change from oligotrophic to mesotrophic to eutrophic, sometimes even because of succession. Right? We talked about ecological succession way back in the beginning of the year, and oftentimes we refer to forests as going through succession after, say, a forest fire, but actually aquatic ecosystems can do that too. And we see that happen when we have sediment buildup, typically on the benthic zone or bottom layer of our lake or freshwater ecosystem, that can sometimes lead to higher nutrient levels. And over time, that oligotrophic lake is going to shift to then a eutrophic lake. So that would be a natural occurrence of eutrophication versus cultural eutrophication, which is driven by human influence. Now, what about in oceans, right? We can see lower levels of DO and dead zones, not only in aquatic ecosystems that are freshwater, but we also see it in marine or ocean-like ecosystems as well. And that's because we know all aquatic life are going to require some form of dissolved oxygen. As the DO decreases, fewer species are going to be able to be supported, and that's when we create oceanic dead zones. So those are actually very low areas of oxygen in the world's oceans that are going to be caused by an increased nutrient pollution. Classic example of that is the Gulf of Mexico. Due to the Mississippi River watershed and all of the different forms of nutrient pollution that come from all different areas of the United States, ends up pretty much in the Gulf of Mexico, and that has kind of become a hypoxic or dead zone, as they like to call it. Now, what about thermal pollution? Now, we've already somewhat touched upon thermal pollution when we discussed nuclear energy. So we know that thermal pollution tends to occur when heat is going to be released into the water, and that's going to cause negative effects to the organisms living there. As that heat increases, the respiration rate of aquatic organisms is going to change. It can sometimes even cause thermal shock. We also know that variations in water temperature can actually affect that water's ability to hold on to dissolved oxygen. As the water warms, it may not be able to contain as much oxygen as, say, cold water can. So actually, they do have an inverse relationship, right, with water temperature and the ability for oxygen to be soluble in that water. So as water temp increases, DO actually decreases. And as heat increases, the respiration rate of organisms will also increase, potentially causing that thermal shock. Where do we oftentimes find thermal pollution? Oftentimes it's power plants that use cool water, especially from surface or groundwater, to then cool steam used to then turn their turbines in order to generate electricity. Other examples can be things like steel mills, paper mills, any type of manufacturing plant that's going to use water in order to then cool certain type of machinery. Urban storm water runoff from, say, cities. Right, we know that that heat island effect that we discussed a little bit in Unit 4. We know that cities, because of a lot of the blacktop asphalt that's used to create the infrastructure, tends to hold on to a lot of heat energy. When we see urban stormwater runoff, that water is going to be very hot, simply because of the surface in which it's coming from. And obviously, like we said before, nuclear power plants also require large amounts of cool water to help cool the steam back into the water and also to cool the reactor core. All right, guys, so here is a practice FRQ here. So I'd like you to describe one strategy other than reducing the use of fertilizer that could be employed to reduce the flow of nutrients into the Mississippi River. So at this point, pause the video, take a few moments, and see if you can answer this practice FRQ. Okay, so you should have at this point paused the video, answered your FRQ. So let's see what are the possible responses that you could have said here. So here are a number of any of the College Board accepted answers that you could have said to reduce the use of fertilizer, reduce the flow of nutrients into the Mississippi River by not just saying reducing the use of fertilizer. So you could have some form of protection, reestablishment of the buffer zones in order to help trap fertilizers. You can maybe limit simply just farming near floodplains. Limit development right near floodplains, improve the agricultural or residential practices, maybe use more sustainable type practices such as no-till farming. Maybe we need to treat the actual stormwater in order to try and reduce nutrients. I know we haven't talked about this just yet, but the requirement of tertiary treatment in wastewater can actually help to eliminate things like nitrogen and phosphorus. Simply just educating the public on techniques in order to reduce the nutrient flow, limit septic systems, the treatment of waste from livestock, maybe have some sort of basin or retention pond to help trap the nutrients to prevent them from moving anyplace else. Establishing green roofs to help decrease runoff in cities, or even create a permeable type pavement to help reduce the flow of water into that waterway. All right, guys, that is it for our video. You want to make sure that you took notes, and please mark this as done.